This is different than the open forum time that we have at our board meetings, where you have 3 minutes to come and speak, and the board is up there listening to what you have to say. This is a session where we're actually going to be presenting to you for the majority of the evening. There will be a time at the end for some questions and all, but we really want to focus those questions on the presentation. Things that come to your mind, questions that develop as you're listening to what Jonathan is presenting. Because what he's going to be presenting really will be 3 different options that our Design and Construction Committee has narrowed things down to at this point. So just kind of wanted to set the stage there. Originally what we did was we sent out notices to neighbors within a 500-foot radius here, and obviously we saw some of the emails and whatever soliciting additional people to come, and that's great. If you're here and live outside that, to welcome you and have you be a part of this information sharing as well. So thank you everyone for being here. In case you hadn't noticed, we are videotaping. And we do plan on putting the videotape up on our website for other people that are interested and want to partake in this status update. You did receive some cards as you came in, and we want you to take the opportunity at some point to fill out those cards. If you have questions, if you have comments, you can turn those in at the end of the session tonight, back in the back. You can mail them in to us. We also will have an opportunity online for you to go online and fill out information. And what I'm committing to you is that our Design and Construction Committee members and our board members will have access to every one of those comments and cards that are filled out tonight. You're going to see 3 possible layouts that are considered. 2 of them are versions that have 2-story wings on them. One version has a 3-story wing. And let me take this time to emphasize, no decision has been made. Design and Construction Committee actually has looked at additional 2- and 3-story designs and has narrowed it down to this point to these 3, and that's what we're going to share with you. But there's a feeling, I think, out there in the community at times that, well, hey, this decision's already been made. And I'm here to tell you, it has not been made. The Design and Construction Committee will consider the input that you have. They will continue to look at our design objectives. They will come up with a recommendation that they feel like is the very, very best for the students in our community, the surrounding neighbors, everyone involved. They'll do the best they can to pick a design that really meets the needs of the entire community, focusing on the kids, because we've said several times we really do design these buildings from the inside out, and that's been a real key focal point for us as we've designed the previous buildings to this one. What else I have here? Process-wise, I'm sure people are interested in the process at this point in time. The Design and Construction Committee will, as I mentioned, they'll take this information, they'll go back, they'll continue to work and refine and come up ultimately with a design that they feel like is the very best design, with the goal in mind that by near the end of August we would be able to come back and share that with various constituencies. Obviously the neighborhood group, with the Legacy Committee, with PTA, with Dad's Club, with our faculty and staff, just have a very open dialogue about the final recommendation that the Design and Construction Committee will come back with. Obviously, we know from the feedback we've gotten so far, whatever we do is not going to please everybody. We all have our own individual tastes and interests. We're going to do the very best that we can, to provide a quality facility that will be in use for years and years to come, and just continue the excellent education that our kids are getting, throughout HPISD. So with that, I'm going to ask Jonathan to come up and present these designs. When he's finished, we'll open it up for some questions. We are going to try to keep this to an hour if at all possible. If we end up running a little bit over, obviously I'm not going to cut things off right at the 7 o'clock straight up, but we want to meet your needs tonight. But once again, we really do want to focus on these designs and questions that you might have concerning them. So with that, Jonathan, it's all yours.
Thank you, Dr. Trigg. As Dr. Trigg said, my goal tonight is to bring you up to date of where we are in the process. Can everybody hear me? I hear myself really loudly. Do you hear me equally? Very good. As Dr. Trigg alluded to, the Design and Construction Committee has spent a great deal of time narrowing options down. I can say we've been through 6 two-story options and 5 three-story options as a group, with a few others that didn't even make it to the group at that point. So the offshoot of that is what you're going to see tonight. The 3, as Dr. Trigg mentioned. I've started every presentation regarding these campuses with this same slide, and I brought it to the December neighbor meeting. If you're one of the people here for the December neighbor input meeting, I opened with this slide to reorient everyone as to the design objectives. Now, what's missing on here are the elements that fill in afterwards. Usually I start presentations, particularly the neighborhood meetings, before we start design, like the one in December, with this slide to reiterate, these are the elements of the bond. These are the things that were a mandate of the bond or have been decided by administration as a portion of every project that we're working on. Kind of 4 main categories. Of course, the first is a larger building for a capacity of 770. That on this campus represents an increase of square footage of about 30%, not students, but square footage. A lot of that is in the reality that a lot of the special programs that most of us did not have when we were in school are now in this school, but they're taking place in hallways, small closets, things like that. So there are several things wrapped up in a larger building. One is larger classrooms, and I don't mean that it's just about making larger classrooms. It's really about equalizing classrooms across grades. There's a great disparity between different size classrooms in the building. So a lot of the process is bringing every classroom to a standard size. Secondary mandates that aren't listed here but are important is every classroom will be designed to have exterior window and also a view to the flexible learning space that's a portion of each of those classroom areas. And you'll see that in the floor plan. And then finally, appropriately sized core spaces. Core is simply gym, dining, library, kind of the large elements that as the building has grown over the years, those spaces don't always get added onto. As capacity has increased, those spaces have not always kept up the pace. Secondarily, if you followed the bond at all, you know that dedicated on-site parking was a portion of the bond. So just like at the other elementary campuses, the plan is for 90 subgrade parking spaces on the site. A large portion of the bond, and a lot of this is in the data that you've seen from the Citizens Action Committee that did the review before the bond, calls for not only a larger building and on-site parking, but actually an increase in active green space. I'll come back to that phrase, active green space, because there's a difference between just green space and active green space, and it'll make more sense on the site plan. And then finally, as you saw in the bond, and as you're all well aware, one of the primary design objectives is architectural compatibility with the city and the neighborhood, and I'm sure that's what a lot of you are concerned about, and you'll stay engaged in the process, and the district welcomes that. Usually at this point on the other campuses, we start filling in other things. For instance, at University Park, they really receive students on what's always been the back side of the building, the Amherst side of the building. So one of their design objectives was to recreate the entire Amherst elevation of University Park so it didn't feel like the back door. So that became a design objective with UP along with a few other items. And so those are the items we still attempt to flesh out by gathering information. Dr. Trigg alluded to a legacy committee, and I'll let either John or Dr. Trigg explain if anybody's interested in the legacy committee, but every campus has had a legacy committee appointed. Their primary charge in the simplest terms is to define what makes Hyer Hyer. What I have on the screen, I'm going to show you 2 pages that are some notes of their outcomes. It's a much longer document. They did a very exhaustive job, not only of cataloging every plaque, every donated tree, that's part of their work, but also giving general ideas of what needs to remain about Hyer when Hyer is not this building anymore. I grabbed these 2 because they point to some of the ideas that we'll talk about tonight. Of course, we all know the front sign has to go back to the front of the building, probably to the left of the walkway, just like it is now at the same height, so we can all measure children to the same standard that's been happening for a while. But one thing I'll point out is there's a lot of notions in here about the aesthetic of the building. I think we all agree that this kind of early Georgian style that Hyer represents, most people have a strong connectivity to. But I'll point out on here a list of courtyards. Courtyard became an issue and is an issue with the Legacy Committee. As you look, we're flanking 2 of the courtyards right now. So for ease of simplicity, this is Balto's courtyard in our way of thinking. Outdoor dining courtyard is really what it is, where the statue of Balto lives. This is really the outdoor classroom courtyard, and then directly behind us is the science classroom courtyard. There's actually a 4th. It's not truly a courtyard, but the Legacy Committee really felt strongly about the idea of organizing spaces for outdoor education, which are happening at the other campuses as well. And then also this idea of this U-shaped setback entry, this very gracious kind of front lawn that we all know that Hyer has. And then secondarily, interesting roof line reminiscent of old Hyer roof line. And these notes are available, I'm sure, if you want to see the Legacy Committee's recommendations. We thought those were all valid points and interesting points that we have to consider early on in the design, even though tonight we're not talking about exterior aesthetic, we're talking about site organization. Those things do have to start to play into how we lay the building out. And then I referred to a neighbor meeting in December of 2017. These are some of the notes, and again, not all of the notes. These notes were gathered and then sent back out to everyone within the notification zone. So even if you weren't here, hopefully you got a copy of these notes. The emphasis added is mine, the text in bold. Those things were not shouted from the rooftops. They were things I was highlighting as I was explaining the design and construction, kind of the importance that I heard at that December meeting. One of the primary issues that we talked about at that meeting was one of the non-glamorous parts of every building is where's the service and delivery side of the building. Our goal really is to make no new enemies every time. So if the dumpsters are on one side of the building, we like to have that conversation very early on and say, this still seems like the right spot? Yes, no. So this page talks about Pickwick, which began to form a lot of our design decisions. Pickwick, there was a strong sentiment, should still be kind of the service zone of the building. Deliveries for the kitchen, primary deliveries, and also what usually goes with that are trash containers. And then there's some thoughts about trees. I think the sentiment is the trees around the perimeter of the site, at least hearing from the neighbors, are great and probably preferable, and they realize that there may be some movement of the ones next to the building. And then secondarily, what I'm sure a lot of you are here for also, is what Dr. Trigg alluded to, a long discussion about two-story versus three-story. So when we say we've heard you, we did hear you at the December meeting, and that's been a lot of our discussion as we move forward. And I just wanted to make sure you realize those are the elements we've been considering as we begin going down the path of designing the new Hyer. I do want to back up one moment and give you the quick overview that I've walked through with DNC to give them a site analysis. Not everyone is intimately familiar with how the site lays out. So just on a very high level overview so we can start thinking about everything, not only the feedback that's been given, but how the building operates now. When we think about entry to the building, this building is a little bit unique compared to the other elementary schools. Students arrive on both sides, Colgate and Caruth. That's an important factor when we think about how this building, how people arrive at the building and how the building receives people, both on the north and south. This image we've used to talk about green space versus program green space. So really we've talked about this is kind of the formal arrival for Hyer. While it does have some use during the school day, I would say most people would say this is weekend use, this is after hours use, this is public use. So we call this public green space. We're kind of parsing it out, but just think of it in those terms because compared to what I'd call program green space, this is what Mr. Gilbert has access to every day. Mr. Gilbert and his teachers are using primarily that space you see highlighted as program green space. So going back to those bond directives, when we talk about active green space, this is really the zone that we focus on the Hyer site specifically. How do we get more room on that, what ends up being the eastern edge of that site, if that makes sense? And then finally, again, back to kind of the zone that we don't think about but needs to be addressed is that delivery zone. Right now, as you know, if you've ever watched someone, if you live around here, of course, you've seen it. If you've seen a delivery driver get into your delivery zone, it's usually a two-person process where the driver gets out and his helper helps him back up. Not the safest way to access the site, but still a valid location for that zone. So when we summarize that very simply and wipe everything off and start with the concept, the reality is these are our elements. The green space very likely still remains on the east side of the site. It makes the most sense. It's heavily treated on the west side. Public entry would still face onto the Caruth side of the building. Very simple way to think of it. And in the delivery zone, it's very elongated in that sketch. That doesn't mean we have the world's longest dumpster pad and driveway. What it means is I'm not sure where it goes in that zone yet. But just in general, I think we'd say Pickwick still becomes that side of it, is really where we address that. So I don't have to be that intelligent to start to plug in some of these pieces as well. So if our green space is to the east, ideally our gym is immediately adjacent. Yes, we've all seen facilities where that's probably not the case, but the way the programs work here, obviously the gym directly adjacent, the administration directly flanking sort of public entry zone, and then kitchen and dining, we can take that green rectangle and turn it several different ways, and you'll see it tonight, turn several different ways to try and address that. So those are kind of the foundational elements that start with this site layout, which makes this site different than any of the other elementary sites and has allowed us to do things differently on this site. So you'll see that as we move forward. And then finally, classroom and library. I moved classroom in this example to the far west side because, in theory, we have playfields on the east side. Now, on your campus, you've had classrooms adjacent to a playfield. Not always the preferred option, but in talking with Mr. Gilbert and staff here, it hasn't been the huge distraction. So you'll see us play with different versions of that tonight. But this starts to lay out and suggest just a simple site partie of how the building could organize. So that's the foundation of the site, right? And then one final thing to just bring two elements to bring to when you look at this image. I think when most of you look at this image, the image we think of when we think of Hyer is from the center of that image and about to the two flanking pieces, the old library and the kindergarten classroom with the fireplace. That's what everybody defines as Hyer. For the most part, when you think of it aesthetically, that's the area you think about. So when our team approaches it, knowing that this has been such a strong presence on Caruth for such a long time, I think we have to honor that, and we have to work around designs that honor that. Even in the original, and this is Mark Lemon's phase 1, he had phase 2 drawn as well, but even in phase 1, kind of the symmetry stopped at that bracketing piece and got a little bit off on the edges, because really he was drawing attention to that front symmetry, which works so well because it's so simple and so clean. So how do you mimic that and honor that in a building that's going to get to be a different shape and size? So one element of this is addressing symmetry. That's been a huge issue for our team and DNC working forward. And then secondarily, if you turn the corner and you stand on the church's property and look at the side, you start to see the ideas of roof lines. You saw it in the Legacy Committee recommendations. I think most of you have it in your heads inherently that there should be something different about the roof lines for Hyer. We don't disagree. I always use this image to point out, even in the original plan, those roof lines were intended to accent and bracket that front entry. They weren't applied throughout the building. In fact, that makes it a little more special and unique that the front portion has that. And so this just talks about the language simplifying a bit as it's gone back. And maybe that starts to inform things in the future. So we've made some assumptions based on those roof lines, and you'll see them in the massing models that I'm going to show you. When I show you big blue boxes, I just ask for your patience and realize they're just boxes to represent massing. The overhangs aren't right on the, we're not there yet. We're at a point of understanding how the pieces go together, but I think the roofs are critical to understanding the massing and the siding of Hyer as we move forward. I'll apologize for one thing as I move forward. I'm going to show you options 2.1, 2.6, and 3.1. I know that makes no sense, but 2.6 has been 2.6 for me for 4 months, so I couldn't change it, and I'm not that bright. I couldn't keep it. So just bear with me. You'll see option 2.1, 2.6, and 3.1. Looking at option 2.1, and a caveat that you'll see on every one that's up here, honestly, if you look at the rest of the images we looked at, I'll say we violated some of those things on those lists. We've gathered all this information, and the question is, can we make everybody happy? The Pickwick discussion was a long discussion. The 3 images you'll see tonight all have conceded the fact that Pickwick still needs to be the delivery zone and also the entry zone for the subgrade parking. So you'll see nothing coming off of Colgate, nothing off of Caruth, everything coming in off of the Pickwick side of the building. And the curve that you see there starts to suggest a drive-through aisle with side-loading dumpsters off of that, all of that screen. Let me walk you through some of the abbreviations that you see in front of you. Admin, pretty straightforward. The large blue A are academic. So this is a 2-story version, so you're seeing 3 academic areas. There are 6 academic areas in the buildings. There's K through 4 grade level, and then there's a specials. That's not just special education. Sometimes it's science, sometimes it's some of the other programs. So really there are 6 of those pods to deal with on the site. I know this image is a little bit busy, but we've been using this so you can understand that odd background, that odd line that you see in the background is obviously the footprint of the existing building. So you can see far out past the east edge of this layout, you start to see the shadow of the current Hyer Elementary. So, and even the front sidewalks that you see there, those are the current sidewalks, just to give you an orientation of the building shifts a bit to the west in this scenario. So upon entering, obviously you have a secure front admin entry. To your left is dining, kitchen area facing Pickwick, gym, of course, off to the east. You'll see F for FLES, or foreign language. This design actually honors the question about interior courtyard. So the space you see between the red and the purple is an interior courtyard. So upon entering, really your view is to this interior courtyard that becomes both the interior dining space and a space that the library can both look onto and possibly have access onto. Also, the library would front out toward Colgate as well. The bar that you see above the library is really just intended to indicate maybe there's a covered area there as well. Maybe a colonnade could be introduced across there. So on the occasional rainy day, you actually would have somewhere covered on the Colgate side of the building, a little bit of an upgrade. And then you can see the classrooms at the three corners, essentially. And then right now we've got science to the northwest corner. One of my favorite parts of the site is this fantastic tree that exists in the northwest corner of the site. So we've tried to make advantage of that everywhere we can. And so maybe the science courtyard becomes a portion of the building that has an ability to be under that tree as well, partially enclosed, defined. Moving upstairs, the building has quite a bit of second floor. In other words, these classrooms, go to the forecourt, you're not seeing my pointer. Classrooms again at the three corners, the boxes with X's through them are higher volume spaces. They're not 2 stories. So the green box is just the dining room. It's not a full 2 stories. The library is the same thing. It's not a full 2 stories. The gym really is about that same 2-story height, but no access on the upper level, allowing us to put the art classrooms over the front entry as well, which actually gives us a fantastic opportunity in that front elevation when we do start to design that front entry with admin below and art rooms above to bring a tremendous amount of light and use those windows on the front as well. I want to give you some ideas of setbacks because I kind of glossed over that in the first image, and I have turned off the trees here. I'm not saying I'm killing all the trees. Please hear me. I just turned the trees off because it got too busy even for me. So on the north, the building currently, and I did all these from the back of curb. I figured I could do property line, but nobody knows where property line is. So when you walk out tonight, the easiest thing to do is stand at the curb and look and see that distance. So on the Colgate side of the building, the furthest extension of the building, the bump out that was built in it was late 70s, that bump out portion is 31 feet off the back of the curb. In this scenario, this building would still be right at that, right about there. And I should have given you the big caveat, so let me stop for a second and say, I know you don't believe this is fully refined and perfectly worked out, so please, dimensions may adjust, things may move around. The idea of this is to get everybody kind of a scale between everything so you can feel the relative impact. But I think it's safe to say in this scenario, your site is about 100 feet deeper, 80 to 120 feet deeper than the other elementary site, so that's allowed us to move this building kind of more north and south. But in this scenario, the building is built from the current Colgate setback to the current Caruth setback. Hadn't gotten any closer. Our mandate as a team is to try and stay within those lines because I really, again, no new enemies, so if I can keep it within those lines, I'd love to. But you can see even the portion that is close is really just this double classroom bay. The rest of the building steps back 50 feet, and then really the library, if you were not to count that colonnade, is closer to 80 to 90 feet back. So pretty significant improvement. Portion still at the original setback, and then on the Caruth setback, those would both be set at about the 65 feet setback that the building is now. The front door moves back just a tad, probably about 20 feet, the admin pod. And then you can see the compaction of the building to the east. So just so you understand where we're beginning to interject roof lines, and again, just the beginnings of studying the massing, and I know nobody sees it from bird's eye, but I wanted you to see kind of the effect. So this is Caruth and Pickwick, where the 2-story elevations present themselves, and then as you look back from Colgate and Pickwick, you can see the massing of the building start to step back. So on the top of that image is a classroom. Hold on one second. So a 2-story classroom bank. The library actually can drop a little bit lower than this, and the dining also would be about that same height, about 1.5 stories, and then the kitchen drops down to a single size. So the building starts to taper. Think of it, easiest way to think of it, starts to taper back kind of to the northwest corner. Then begins to give you an opportunity on the face of the building, and these images I'll show you from entry views. Until you see all three of them side by side, it's really hard to tell the difference in kind of setback. But the reason they're the innocuous blue boxes right now is so you can imagine, paint on there whatever image you have in your head for that, because that's the next step of the process. But these are really to understand scale. I know the sign's not there, and I know the flagpole's not there, and they'll both need to be there. So I duly noted. And then backing up a bit down the street to start to get scale with the neighborhood around. I know it's really hard to tell scale. I know the trees are all identical. The point of the trees is to anchor them on the shots so you can get a relative idea. Every time I show you a different image, you can compare it to where the trees are. We'll get to a point where the trees are the accurate size, but they're in approximate locations of the trees so you can get a feel for scale. It's really hard to do at this size, granted. Option 2.6. This one has a similar arrangement where admin is front and center. little bit more running east and west. And honestly, this plan runs a little bit more east-west and saves a little bit north and south. Easiest way to think of the difference between 2.1 and 2.6. Again, kitchen is to the west. In this scenario, the kitchen may be a little more challenging because you can see where my drive aisle starts to insert itself is right under one of these larger grove of trees. So there'll be a bit of a trick of getting a drive aisle in there. It's not impossible, but it's just one of the factors we think about when we're looking at not just having the building there, but actually constructing it as well. So kitchen and dining to the left, and then 3 academic pod areas across the back as a 2-story. You can see some of the special programs. This plan actually starts to throw a little bit back to the original uniqueness of the 2 anchor portions on the front of the building. In this case, our 2 art rooms and 2 music rooms would be those portions. That wouldn't be a 2-story portion. I'll show you the upstairs. That would allow us to actually bring those masses up just a bit, I think, to kind of accentuate that. Fairly similar to what's there now. Gymnasium, as you see, science has moved to the east side here. Now, for arriving students, Mr. Gilbert and I have talked about, do we allow students to come in through the classroom pods in the morning, or do we introduce another interstitial hallway that comes in here? That's an element that still needs to be worked out, but that would still allow us, even if we had to pull these masses apart a bit, that would still allow a more formal entry from the north. And I don't believe you're going to have a library that's the configuration of a bowling alley. But again, you've got that interior courtyard, so maybe the library is a little more gracious L that wraps around and creates a bit of a nook there where it's in an outdoor dining space as well. So both of the 2-story versions I'm showing you have an interior courtyard as a part of it. And then secondarily, they both have what we would say is a science courtyard. That doesn't mean this space goes away. This space we've replicated on the other sites as well. And so whether it's a courtyard space, it isn't drawn as a courtyard space, but it very well could be a space around the site. Ideally, it'd be somewhere where we can get sun. We have okra growing out here and moonflower and a few other things, so it needs to be somewhere where it'll get sun. Interior courtyards are not always the best location for that. But in this case, the difference is entering through admin, you'd be at the library, and the library fronts directly onto that courtyard space. And the courtyard's a little more dedicated to the children's side of the building than the public side of the building. Could be a really nice element in either case. The huge difference in this plan is when you move upstairs, these are just higher volumes. This is the extent of the 2-story portion of the building. One of the notes that those who are taking photos of the slides that are up there, you probably saw in the Legacy Committee recommendations, this idea about children at different grade levels being able to cross during the day. I think this plan most closely supports that, because as you look at these as grade level pods, really they have their single corridor up here and dual stair towers, so there'd be a lot of that interaction happening as well. But a key difference between 2.1 and 2.6 is this idea of a 2-story core that's very compact on the northern edge of the building. And then when we look at setbacks, I told you this one gives a little bit north and south. It sacrifices a little bit to the east to get a little bit of movement back off of Colgate. So about 50 feet to those classroom areas. Again, holding that same 65 feet off the front. And then this, you'll have slides where green space is totaled for you, so you don't have to do the math. I'll get that to you. So that gives you an idea. Again, didn't cut down the trees, just clarified the trees. So the massing on this begins to read very differently, even from kind of a bird's eye view. You can start to see these elements. As you move to Colgate and Pickwick, you have these 3. What I think is interesting about this is now you have this symmetry around this zone, and you actually have a possibility to kind of recreate a symmetry on this zone on the Colgate side as well. I didn't point out in 2.1, but again, if you were taking pictures, look back at 2.1 and you'll see the eastern face of 2.1 that faces the play area also has a symmetrical layout to it. So in 2.1, you have a southern symmetry and an eastern symmetry. On this one, it looks like a northern and a southern symmetry. So you start to get an idea of the scale for this. It's actually fairly similar. I was tempted to overlay the original current picture street view of Hyer. This is the library behind. I really think it probably doesn't need to be that tall, so that could come down. Maybe this entry portion comes up a bit. In fact, maybe these art and music pods can come up. We try to have higher ceilings in those at the other campuses, so it makes sense here. Right now we're showing them as a single story. Even if I could get another 4 feet, and by the time I put a gable on those, I think this is modeled at a 6-foot sight line, so honestly, most of that mass behind there goes away. There is still a gym behind this portion. I can't hide that with a story and a half, but I do think you could address that. This piece could read a little more cleanly, and that piece starts to subjugate to it. So I think there's real potential in this one as well, but the scale, I think you saw it in the Massive, this kind of works the opposite direction. It tapers from north to south, so it moves from a Colgate High and steps down toward the south. And then, of course, you start to back down the street, it still would read fairly similar, at least for the bulk of this portion of the building, to the mass of the building now. And still at that same setback. So it's probably the easiest thing to visualize when you're walking out tonight. You can kind of get an idea of what that might look like. I will point out the courtyard is a bit wider. You can see on here the width of this courtyard is even wider than the current front courtyard space as well. So if I haven't lost you yet in keeping up with facts and figures, 3.1, and I'm running over, so I tend to talk faster, so you'll have to listen faster or ask follow-up questions. 3.1, you see the footprint. Again, a much wider courtyard than in 2.1. Admin and center. Again, because this is a 3-story version, you have 2 of the classroom pods that would be a 3-story stack. Gymnasium is moved in this scenario up to the northeast corner, which actually gives us an option to reclaim some of this as active green space. I'm not sure if Jeremy would want to do that, but it's an option that's out there. Remember I talked about public green space? This gains you program green space. It actually gains you a bit of public green space as well. There's trade-offs to every one of these scenarios. I think we all know that, but it does back the building off pretty significantly from both directions. It allows me to turn that green block, like I alluded to earlier, a little more cleaner delivery to the kitchen, and it also gives me where the notch in the trees is already, it gives me an opportunity to get drive aisles in. We could work drive aisles in any scenario. I'm not going to orient the building or pick the size based on where the drive aisles are, but it's an element we think about as we're moving forward. So as you move up, music had this space on the ground floor. Second floor is art. This is again dining and gymnasium. And when you're at the 3rd floor, everything below here is 2 stories or lower. So really the 3-story portion. Library sits above administration in this example. So you could take advantage of that higher volume for the library as well. Dimensional setbacks. If you remember, our setback off of Caruth was 65 with the current building. We're about 30 feet further back. And then we've gone more than doubled the setback off of the Colgate side as well. And again, this bar along the Colgate side ranges from 1.5 stories to 2 stories. So the masses step down and step back quite a bit. It's really hard to tell in the models, but so part of the assumption of going to 3-story on this site is the reality of carving the 3rd story into the roof line. Unlike the other schools where they're full parapet height, the goal here has been, and this has been a lot of work, that's why I say don't fall in love with the pitches just yet, because we have to work out kind of the rake of those roofs. You want the roof line to be readable. You want the classroom windows to still have the same windows as the language below them. So there's a little bit of a structural trickery that has to happen here to do that. So really what this height ends up being is really about a 2-story plus about 4 feet, and then a roof slope that starts, if that makes sense. That's where we think we are right now. Like I said, there's a little bit of structural work that has to make all of that happen. And just by simple logic as well, those classrooms get a little bit smaller on the 3rd floor. And remember I said it's not about larger classrooms, it's about same size classrooms. So our thinking right now is in order to do this, our 2 ground floors have to upsize just slightly so that when our 3rd floor classrooms are pushed in just a hair, and I mean about 2 feet along a 30-foot dimension, we may have to upsize those ground floors. So the trade-off here is the height is brought down a bit visually with that pitch line, but it does mean I have to bring a little bit more square footage on the 2 floors below. It's a lot of details to work through, and our contractor is working with us now to help us understand the pricing, ramifications to go with that. But this at least gives you an idea of a feel for that. And then again, moving toward the back, this building again tapers toward the northwest corner. In this one, the dormers are functional dormers. You notice in the 2-story, I didn't have the little cheesy dormers popped in. The thinking now is the 2-story is a 2-story structure with a gable roof on, or with a sloped roof on it, where in a 3-story version, those dormers are not applied, they are actual classroom windows. Could be a really nice feature of the classrooms up there. Certainly would be different for the classrooms that are upstairs, but another element to work through. And again, you've got the library over the front door, so really an interesting opportunity there. There is no, for those who are keeping score, there is no courtyard with this plan. So That is a difference between the first and second story. There's spaces dedicated outside, science classroom, things like that, but not, go ahead.
Am I allowed to ask a question? So earlier you said that you were working with Jeremy Gilbert. I'm assuming you said Jeremy. Is that the principal of the school?
Yes.
And so does he have a say in whether or how these buildings are built? Is that
Dr. Trigg, you want to address?
understand or am I incorrect?
Let me finish.
Okay, thank you.
So, from here on, I'm just going to show you recap. And if you can read those dimensions, fantastic. It looked great on my screen, but now that I put that up there, I can't see it either, and I can't see it on my desktop. But anyway, this gives you you've been kind of on a whirlwind tour of facts and figures. I've also done kind of the layout. So that is virtually unreadable for the current, but you get a feel for, by having that footprint in the background, and my green space is turned to yellow space here, so pardon that, but this gives you an idea of overall footprints compared to each other. This was an attempt to start to give you an idea of scale of the three compared to each other. 3.1 is the one at the right. And if you're starting to think those masses start to look the same, a lot of that's about the setback. Remember with 2.1, we're right at the current setback, so a two-story at that current setback versus a three-story set further back. I think this starts to help a little bit. Again, this is what I was talking about. When you look at the tree line, it starts to give you an idea of the different setback of the building. While the bird's eye may not be good for mass, it does give you an idea of where the building sits. And then similarly from the back, remember in 2.1, we were right up to the current building setback. In 2.6, we retreat back from that about 19 feet, 20 feet, and then in 3.1, it's pulled back a bit more. So for the facts and figures crowd, I have green space information, because I told you green space was a consideration. So to be fair and conservative, I went ahead and counted everything you see highlighted as what I would call active green space or program green space, because those courtyards, while they may be for the most part paved, they are used as part of daily instructional programming. So we could round up and say we're right around 88,000 usable active green space on the Hyer site right now. I think that's a fair assessment. So how do the three compare to each other? Again, I told you we kind of parse terms a little bit here about public green space. So I'm not going to focus on those. I'm going to focus on this number. So program green space in 2.1. And for those of you who remember when you had a soccer field at Hyer up until 2007, that was not truly a soccer field. It was the skinniest soccer field I've ever seen. This is actually a regulation soccer field in case you're ready to field a full regulation soccer field. We've just used that as a placeholder. The playground images, the sport court, those are placeholders to talk about where things could go to give you an idea for size and scale. So remember, if our number is about 88,000 at the current building, in 2.1 you're looking at about 117,000 feet, rounding up, all right? And again, I've got an indoor courtyard that I'm not counting in that space. Looking at 2.6, remember I said that gave a little bit of room to the east and west, which makes sense. There's a little bit more public space and a little less program space, about 113 for simplicity. And then in 3.1, a gain on both the public green space, but I said wouldn't focus on that, and then a gain on the program green space, about 124,000. So if you've been asking in your head how much difference could it possibly make, that's about it. I have it down to the ones place, but don't hold me to that. Again, things can change. I think it gives you a good order of magnitude to compare between them all. So just simply, again, about 116, 113, and 124. So I don't know what time it is, but I think I've stopped. I'm done with my talking.
Building square footage between 2.1, 2.6, 3.1?
Not off the top of my head. I should have brought that, but I don't. They'll be similar. The 3.1's a little bit leaner. The question was, do I know building square footage between 2.1, 2.6, and 3.1? 3.1 is a little bit leaner because the circulation's more compact. 2.6 is the next one in size down, and then 2.6 and 2.1 is the largest square footage because the second floor footprint is so large. But I don't have those. You'd think I'd have that number memorized, but I don't have that one memorized at the moment.
So can I ask a question? So who's making the decisions in the different 2.9 and whatever? I mean, who's making those decisions?
Don't go far because you're going to get to answer a lot of questions. let me go back to the first question about the principal and input and all that. Jeremy is not a part of the Design and Construction Committee, and so he would not have input into the final, but he is a part of the Legacy Committee, and so you saw some of those recommendations. So he is very much involved in knowing what's going on and giving his thought process. And obviously there's some informal give and take that happens between the principal and superintendent and all. So in terms of formal decision making, no. In terms of informal, absolutely, his thoughts are being considered with all this. So that's answer to question number one.
Can I ask, so based on, we have informal decision making and formal decision making, so who is in charge of the formal decision making?
Okay, as I mentioned, the Design and Construction Committee, which has several staff members, has 2 of our trustees, and has, I believe, 5 different community members who all have different areas of expertise, makes up the Design and Construction Committee. The way that's worked to this point is they have worked very closely with the architect. They're the group that has taken different designs out to for the community input, to the legacy committees, whatever, and they have formalized a recommendation. So they really are, to this point, have been the I'll say decision-making, but the recommending group. And obviously our Board of Education would always have final say particularly if they did not like the direction that the Design and Construction Committee was headed. So that's process. One more, and then other people have questions too. So.
Sorry, so then what weight do you take into consideration as far as the informal and formal decision-making, as far as the citizens that are actually taxpayers in University Park and Highland Park as to how you're designing these schools? Because we are in fact paying the taxes, and it seems like you have turned over a lot of the decision-making to employees who don't live in this district. And I feel like that is something that we deserve to know. How much is our input being taken into consideration?
Sure. I'll say this. You have a number of citizens that are on the Design Construction Committee that are representing you all. You have elected Board of Education members that obviously are part of that. In terms of your input, we're trying the best that we can to have meetings like this. This is the second one of those meetings that we've had where we can sit.
It's been ineffective, not to be rude, but it's been ineffective, right?
Hey, time out. Hang. Let me.
Members on the committee are members of the surrounding community. How many members on your decision-making committee live in immediate proximity to this school?
Okay, the question is, how many members of the Design and Construction Committee actually live within the direct proximity? I don't know the answer to that because I don't know where. Hang on, please. Hey, folks, let's be civil, okay? Let's be professional. Let's ask questions. We'll do the very best we can to answer those questions. I'll be as honest as I can, but let's have a dialogue that's as professional as we possibly can. I would appreciate it, and I think most of you would appreciate that as well. To answer the question, I do not know where every one of those committee members lives. However, I will say at least one of them is within the direct hire area.
All right, I have one more question.
No, hang on. We will come back to you. We have.
Justify $50 million to increase
I'm sorry.
Hyer's population.
Back in the back. What is your question?
Period.
Two questions. Is Mr. one said that there was this meeting invite was only sent out to the top people within 500 feet of the school. Why was that criteria selected? And do you send out the questions that can't be answered? Do you publish formal responses back to those? If we have a report here, can you go ahead and find the answers that bring that forward?
Okay. Let me try to rephrase that. Why did we limit our mailing to 500 feet? And then the second question, I want to be sure I got it right because I'm not sure I heard. Will we follow up with answers to questions that we can't answer? Answer to the first question is absolutely, we wanted to work first and foremost with those that live closest to the facility, because they're going to have the greatest, it's going to have the greatest impact on them. So we had that initial meeting back in December with those that lived surrounding. John, I don't remember, was that a 200-foot or a 500-foot radius the first time?
At that point, we just did the immediate perimeter, and then on this one, we chose to expand it to 500 feet.
Okay, so we expanded from the immediate perimeter to 500 feet. There again, as I stated at the beginning of the meeting, those of you that are here that live further than that, you're more than welcome to be here. I mean, this is an open meeting, and we're happy to have you here. In terms of follow-up, absolutely. I mean, we want to have dialogue. If there are questions that we can't answer, we'll do the very best that we can to put answers together to those questions. Yes?
I'll be respectful and stand
Thank you.
to face you. Since we're all about education, how many of our members that are involved with both committees of design? I know we have bankers, we have energy, we have real estate, we have healthcare administrators. Thankfully, we have United States Air Force. How many of you know the 5 principles of design? How many of you know the 11 principles of design? How many of you have ever taken history of architecture? How come you have shown us a Prince Mansard roof? Do you know what a Prince Mansard roof is?
Do I personally know the answer to that question? I do not.
Okay, this is about education. And personally, I feel like our area
Okay.
has been demeaned, condescended, and dumbed down. And tonight, I heard you say, if we haven't lost you yet, if you can understand this. Well, I'm not in first grade. I've been professional for 48 years, and I've lived in Park Cities for 49. And we're all about education. And we're about history. Winston Churchill talked to us about what you build is what you repeat, what you sow, what your legacy is. And that's all I have to say.
Okay. Thank you. I will indicate that on our Design Construction Committee, obviously, we have a professional architect that's a part of that committee that's providing input and information to us. We do have a local architect that's on that committee. We have a developer that's on the committee, public relations specialist, and I'm sure I'm missing some, but John, you can help me out there if whatever. Yes?
Yes. Is HPISD ready to make a commitment that they will engage a classical consulting architect to help the architect of record as is being done in Highland Park? Is that a commitment you're ready to make yet? Because I think I'm hearing a lot of consensus that our concern is with the aesthetics and the massing and the proportions that, in our opinion, may have not been done correctly on the 2 schools that have been built to date. And that would put a lot of people at ease if you guys would step up to the plate and say, this is a classic school, we need a classical architect on the books, helping and arm in arm with the person that designs schools, but we do not want an institutional. Hyer is very unique that it sits in the middle of a neighborhood, and we desperately need a neighborhood-friendly classical building that does not look like a big box store in the middle of the neighborhood.
To answer your question as honestly as I can, and you won't like this answer, but no, tonight I'm not ready to commit to that kind of a commitment to have a classical architect join Stantec. I believe...
I've seen some of our council people, I hope they're here, and it's a shame that we're going to have the city mandated as Highland Park did. I think it's the right thing to do. You know that there's architects who've offered their time. As homeowners, we've even raised money and offered to pay for the architects and were declined. So the school needs to be responsible with a 100-year decision not to build a giant block in the middle of this community.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
It may have been presented, but from a standpoint of the increase in the students from existing through the 3 options, what are the percentage increase in students? And it seems from looking at the green space, what we're doing is adding 30,000 to 40,000 square feet of green space, but we're increasing it from 1 story to 2 stories. Is that kind of what's happening? Because we've gone from 85,000 square feet existing up to right around 115,000, 125,000. So we're adding more green space, but that's where we get to 2 and possibly a 3 story. Thank you.
So 85 I agree with, but 100,000 is the new building. It may range as high as 105, but 100,000 is the program for the new space, so it's not 125,000.
Jonathan, what are the height differences in loosely?
Right now, the assumptions I've made right now is it's about 5 feet of difference between the way the 2 with a gable has been put on it and the classrooms being cut into the 3rd floor. That can change. We've had to make certain assumptions on the rake of the roof of the 2nd floor. As we move forward with the modeling of it, it'll tell us better what the height of the 2-story version would be. I can tell you what the 3-story is.
How tall is the 3-story was my question.
So the top of the ridge line is 45 feet.
I want to be sure I answered the question that was just asked here a minute ago. The very first question, I'm not sure I understood, but you were asking like capacity, number of students. It'd be 770 students capacity in all 3 of those scenarios.
And versus the current capacity of the school.
Jeremy, about 600 current capacity?
740.
Excuse me.
Currently, we have 700 students.
700 students currently, and I believe that's over capacity. So about 600 and some. I don't know that exactly, but that's right. Okay, right here. Yeah.
I've heard discussion of 2-story and 3-story. How does the 2-story height compare to the 2-story height of the education wing of the University Park Methodist Church next door?
It's very similar. I don't have their plans, but I counted bricks the other day when I was out there. I know it's similar to the gymnasium portion. And again, I don't have access to their plans. I'd love to find out, but it'd be very similar to the 2-story education portion.
Yes.
I think a lot of people sitting in this room have a concern with a 3-story. I could be wrong, but that's the majority of what I hear. So I'm just curious if anyone in this room wants Hyer to be a 3-story, will you please raise your hand or stand up? Does everyone in here, or does the majority of people here want it to be a 2-story? Will you raise your hand?
With an architect.
So I think that's
Okay.
a big concern.
And I appreciate that and all. I really would like to bring us back to why we're here. This is an informational session for us to share with you information. I hope you've appreciated that.
Yes.
And what we want to do is try to focus our questions about the presentation, if at all possible, as opposed to, making statements and whatever. But if you have...
And Chad, the 2-story would go in line with the 2-story images that voters were shown when we voted for the bond.
Yes, do you have a question?
Yes, do any of the designs presented include an auditorium, or is it all combined with a cafeteria with no grade on the floor?
No, it's a large group instruction adjacent to the dining space. So it's not a dedicated auditorium space.
Yeah. Kelly?
Did I hear this on your 3 renderings, 3-story, 2-story, then 2.6, 2.1, and whatever? Can you go through that square footage again? Because I could have sworn that the 3rd story had less square footage than the 2-story footprint.
I think the question was overall square footage of the 3?
3 different.
Right.
So the 3rd story,
Third is the most compact, has the least amount of square footage. The 2.6 would be and I should have the numbers with me, but I don't. The 2.6 would have the second least, and then the most square footage would be the 2.1.
so you're not adding capacity for children learning, you're adding more field.
The delta between them is the program. So there's X number of classrooms. The music room is this. The programs are the same in every one of the 3. The capacity is the same in every one of the 3. The difference is circulation. It's all the pieces in between, right?
But Hyer has the biggest footprint of all the elementary schools, so we have a lot of green space. I thought the whole point of reconstructing the school was to give more classrooms auditorium to make room for the overcrowding that exists today.
I'm not understanding the question. You have more classrooms. You have the capacity.
To demolish Hyer to create more fields, we're trying to bring
So I mean, I agree with you, because my question is why we would spend $30 to $50 million, and per the pre-bond package, it was 720 students at Hyer, and we're creating space for 770 students, 50 more students, for $30 to $50 million. That does not make sense. That is a breach of fiduciary duty and obligation to spend our taxpayer dollars.
Another question.
Well, I'll bring it back to the specific plans, because I was just taking a few notes. So, first of all, I just want to say thank you for working hard on two-story options, because we know that the other schools you're building have three-story elements. We know this site is different, so thank you for working hard on those. I just wanted to say that, and not coming in with three-story options. But made notes just on all three. So the two-story options are better than the three-story option, really on every measure. They have a courtyard, which is a priority of the Legacy Committee. They have all the programming space that you need. Yes, they're not perfect. They have another 30% program green space, and the setbacks are maintained. The only measurable benefit to the three-story, and you exclude the courtyard from this, is another 12,000 square feet of green space. I'd like to know what's driving the inclusion of a three-story option. Why are we considering?
Okay. I think what I would say is, as we've tried to design these from the inside out and look at how spaces relate to one another, we look at those flexible learning spaces, we look at educational opportunities for kids, that we felt like we've designed, and I know you're going to disagree with this, but we've designed some very, very wonderful educational spaces for kids that are three-story. And so I think it only makes sense to go ahead.
With all due respect, I think from what I've seen, everything you just mentioned is accomplished in the two-story. So what's driving the decision to include a three-story other than it worked at UP and Bradfield, which we know those are different sites. This is a more efficient site, so why would we consider it? I still am not understanding.
Yeah. There again, I believe that as the Design and Construction Committee has looked at things, they wanted to look at all options. They wanted to look at a balance of different options that they could consider. And, to this point, we've looked at 3 and 2 and narrowed it down to these particular ones. Yes?
I think it's worth mentioning, when they showed the massing for the 3 different options, the 3-story option looked about the same in height to the 2-story option. The dormer was a little bit deceptive, so I think we need to take that into account.
Yeah.
Not that it's intentional, but it just looks very, very similar. But I wanted to also mention, like Ramsey said, design is not entirely subjective, and by every measure, the 2-story options are more interesting and more properly scaled for the neighborhoods and for children. But I also want to make another point. I understand the district is proceeding with these rebuilds to buy back land for possible future expansion beyond these rebuilds, 50 years down the road, who knows? And one key thing to note is that the 2-story options lend themselves much better to future expansion. You can simply build on top of those 2-story classrooms, whereas the 3-story option has undesirable options for future expansion. You will have to build in the front of the building, which will require adding in a courtyard after the fact so that you can have light in the classroom. There's going to be reworking of the interior. You're going to add, secondly, you'll add a 4th story to the 3-story classroom towers, or you'll build out onto the active green space. So any architect I've spoken with or talked to, a 2-story option is a 1-minute decision. Doesn't take very long. It's the better option for Hyer.
Thank you.
Hi, Dr. True. A couple of questions and then a comment. Firstly, I just wanted to say that you guys have been very good about using the term multiple times, informational session, as well as the president's press secretary.
going to be a time where you actually do consider community input other than just checking off this box that you've had this meeting tonight and labeling it as an informational session. We know what's going on. We want the part about the community input, and we want that to be considered. That was a comment. Secondly, back to the original question, who exactly is this design committee, names, and how were they chosen?
Sure. They were appointed by our Board of Education early on in the process. They've been working together for, help me, John, a couple of years now together. John, I think you have put the names out, previously, so shall we just indicate we'd be happy to share those at some point? I'm a little, I'll be honest, what we have is volunteers, and I think they are doing an outstanding job, as they work through all these issues. And I think those of us that are elected officials and employees are the ones that need to be responding and answering the difficult and hard questions. And so I want to thank them for the role that they play, the input that they provide, and whatever. But I do want to understand that they're volunteers just like you are. They're community members. And so please, as you communicate with them or whatever, understand that they're playing a very important role, and they volunteered for these particular positions.
But you really, with all due respect, didn't answer either question. I still don't know who they are, and I don't know how they were chosen. I would have gladly volunteered had I known that was an opportunity. I mean, how did that come about? What's their background?
Just to clarify, he said he put everything on, all the answer our questions they couldn't answer on the website afterwards, so hopefully they will put their
Yeah.
names,
Did not
addresses.
say on the website? Is that where it's going to be, on the website? Besides that,
We will communicate that information to you. I don't want to go on record as saying it's going to be here, there, or wherever, but we will communicate that information to you.
Okay, and then my last comment was about the three-story. That third story and the gables and the classrooms and the dormers, I'm not sure what that was. It was a poor attempt to satisfy a design element that people say they want. Larry Border, you might can explain what that was to me later. But that is not going to look right. So please.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
Thank you.
Hi, so I had a question because there seems to be a priority for green space. And with the three-story option, it seems like we do gain more green space on the front and the back setbacks, and then about 13,000, is that right? 13,000 in the playground area. For the use of the children, the front and the back of the school are used just really on entry in the morning and then dismissal in the afternoon. So I don't think that extra green space necessarily benefits them. And then the additional 13,000 square feet, I would ask how that works in the programming of the day, because regardless of the extra 10,000 feet, you can still only have maybe one grade out there at a time. Or I had a third grader who had recess last year at 2:30 in the afternoon, which completely negates the purpose of recess in a long school day, to give children an opportunity to be active and wiggle and come back in and be able to focus. So how is the larger field going to really serve the children? And when there are certain minutes they do have to be inside the classroom, and there's just a program of moving a grade, in and out.
Sure. I think the general concept is that, there's not a lot of expansion space in the park cities in terms of park space, green space, whatever. So if you can maximize that, that's very important. It does help with the kids, obviously, PE classes, we do have 2 PE classes at a time, and they can go out and whatever. But it's also for after school and it's community use, in terms of just trying to create as much active and viable green space as possible.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Would the three-story option then provide for two soccer fields, or would it still just be one soccer field with the
I think the layout that was shown there is preliminary, so I don't have an answer for that question. Would it accommodate 2 full-size soccer fields and playground areas and court space and whatever? I'm going to say probably not, but it would definitely be more than we currently have. Right here.
Yeah, I had a question for the designer. What are the thoughts on making the school feel approachable from the Colgate side? I know there's been a lot of emphasis on the Corinth side, but
Right.
I think one of the nice things about the school is that it looks like you could approach it from the Colgate side, whether those doors are used to walk or not.
Right.
And it looked kind of like the middle option, those kind of big box buildings with no actual entry to the school. I kind of shut that. What are your thoughts on that?
So I've been kind of sketching around with the 2.6 idea. You've got those 3 modules, and it's kind of a double bay and a single entry. There's actually a really nice opportunity to introduce an entry piece at each one of those 3 that again comes to whether the school wants that to be a defined option. If you're trying to get something that's not in that classroom module, then I would suggest those courtyard spaces would need to pull apart a bit so that you could have an entry back through there. So then the 2.6, I think there's real opportunity for that. The 2.1 actually has a library facing out to the back, and that becomes a very simple, clean entry structure.
Okay, I'm going to try to pick on some people that haven't asked questions yet. It's about 7:10. We're going to go about 5 more minutes, so we'll have 3 or 4 more questions real quick. And I want to be sure that you know that you have the opportunity to write questions down on those cards as well as comments, and we'll do the best that we can to get back with you. So let me go to the gentleman right here.
What's the #1 reason why we're tearing this school down?
Okay, sure. Number 1 reason is to redesign the learning spaces for the kids. There is very little, if any, flexible learning space in this current facility. And Jeremy, I'm not going to put you on the spot, but Jeremy could answer that question probably better than anyone. When you're pulling kids out of classrooms and putting them in hallways, under stairwells, excuse me, in this case it wouldn't be under stairwells, putting them in storage closets and those kinds of things, for small group instruction, it's not optimal. These buildings, have been in existence a long time. It's really time to, refresh, build flexible learning space buildings that will take us into the next 100 years. So that's the number 1 reason.
How can we make them look better on the outside?
Yes.
I just want to ask a question. I know we've been talking a lot about kind of massing the building in 2 versus 3, but I'm curious, when is the next step where we'll start to see an elevation? What I'm really kind of curious on is the one elevation or rendering I have seen, may have been a while ago, but it looked like frankly a very transitional, kind of structure. The 9 or the 12 over 12 windows are gone, and 4 over 4 windows, and I never hear the words clean lines ever again. It won't be soon enough.
Okay.
That just seems to be the style now, where you're taking this kind of very traditional, aesthetic I think everyone's concerned about. And I want to belittle the lose sight, I guess, of the 2 versus 3, but even if you get the 2-story, but then you design a structure that has all gaping holes for windows, you've lost all the appeal.
Sure.
When's the step?
Yeah, we anticipate late in the month of August, when school has started up again, that we will have elevations. That's our goal at that point in time. The other drawing that you're referring to was probably what we referred to as just kind of a first look, what it might look like. I would encourage you not to use that at all as what you think or believe the eventual actual building will look like. There's some people haven't been able to ask any questions, so I feel like I'm concentrating right around here, so let me go back there and then I'll come back, okay? Yes, ma'am.
I know recently we've changed the number of doors for giving access into the school for the security reasons, and we shut down those 2 gates that you can't come in the morning. It seems like in the 2.6 version, there'd be 3 accesses in the back and 1 in the front. Is that something we're considering with how many times we want, or how many doors we want open in the morning for people to get in?
Great question.
There was just 1 in the back and 1 in the
Sure.
front.
No, absolutely. And here again, this is premature for me to make this decision or say this, but I would anticipate that in the morning there would be two entryways open, no matter how many doorways there might be on each side. We would keep several of those locked. At the Fifth Elementary, for example, we have the main entry open, which is the drop-off point, and then we have a pedestrian where bikes and walkers can come in, and that's it. And I would anticipate that each one of these schools on a maximum would have 2 entry points.
And we still have 3 big doors in the back, so wouldn't that kind of defeat the purpose of those separate wings back there?
Well, if you think of those separate wings as the learning spaces and all, yeah. So I'm not sure I'm understanding that question exactly. I don't know that it defeats the purpose. I mean, right. More than likely, and I may be misspeaking, I'd probably better defer to Jonathan here, but the number of doors that you have for egress for things like fire drills and those kinds of things is more than likely going to be similar in all of these because it's going to be mandated, by fire code and all that. But I want to defer to Jonathan. And so, however many they are, we would lock all of them down, but hopefully 2. And there again, I can't guarantee that, but that's the way that I would anticipate that at this point. Okay. Yes.
I have a question for John. I had the opportunity this morning to watch a very informative video that I think it was you back in 2015, maybe sans the beard. Yes. Given a very persuasive...
15 pounds lighter and no beard, yes.
Given a very persuasive presentation as to why you could accomplish all of the objectives of the bond package in a 2-story structure within the current footprints of Hyer. I guess I would ask, what has changed between now and then that we're considering all these other 3-story options? I guess it's now whittled down to 1. What has changed?
I don't think anything has. I mean, obviously the 2-story still is a workable solution. There's a lot of good 2-story solutions. But like Dr. Trigg said, in a design process, you run through more scenarios than you're going to end up with. So this is really more about the exploration of, you've seen now the gain of a 3-story versus a 2, you could boil down to 13,000 feet of green space. Now it's a question, is that worth it to you? So the exploration is good because I think you learn something in every version that you lay out, honestly, and it improves your final version.
Okay, I'm going to take a couple more questions. Let me go back to the gentleman in the back, and then I'll go back to the lady that is just waving like crazy back there. Okay. Yes. Yes.
So two questions. First one is timeline again. So this EMC committee, when will they make a decision between these 2 options? That's 1. 2, with all due respect, I understand that volunteers, we're still their constituents. So I assume that they accepted the responsibilities when they chose to be on this committee. So I'm obviously pro 2-story. I think it sounds like everyone in the room is. I'm willing to hear what their points of emphasis are if we're considering 3-story. But I think it would be more than expected and reasonable for them to show up here. And you keep using more dialogue. Dialogue insinuates that it's a back and forth as opposed to just coming one way. So I think it's reasonable for them to take an hour out of their time to at least educate us on what those points are and why they would even consider those things. So the timeline, and then when we might get an opportunity to actually dialogue with the committee to make this decision.
Yeah. Timeline, as I previously indicated, the committee will continue to meet with the hope to have something to bring back to the community in late August. So they'll continue to work as many meetings as needed, this summer, spring and summer, whatever, to get to that point. I'll take your question under advisement in terms of bringing them to a meeting or whatever. I know you don't like this, but I'm inclined to not do that. I'll just be up front and tell you I would rather have our trustees and our employees be the ones to take those questions.
Not the taxpayers, but yep.
Design
Okay.
committee doesn't work without a classical architect.
Okay, back in the back. What we were trying to show tonight is that we have 3 massing studies that we've done in terms of the aesthetics and all that's yet to be developed. Well, like what you saw tonight was 2 two-story options and 1 three-story option. It will more than likely be one of those, and we will design around, that particular massing. All right.
Thank you. I'm so tired.
I just didn't want you to think I intentionally was not going to call on you.
You're awesome. Just a couple of help. You talked about the video. When you walk out, you can see the two-story structure that when they did the video, everybody goes, there's some cards handed out if you go look at that.
Scott, do you have a question?
Yeah. Well, the other thing too is I do have a question. Whoever was quoting the 13,000 extra square feet, it's actually 8. And I'm asking you that question. Wasn't it 80,000? And then under 2.1, it was 116,000. And then under the third story, it went to 124,000. So it's 124,000 minus 116,000, 8,000.
I need.
So it's not 13,000. It's 8,000.
The reference was between 2.6.
It's 8,000 square feet.
The delta between 2.6 and 3.1 is the 13.
13, you're adding an extra 34%, going from 1-story to 2-story. If you go from 2-story to 3-story, you're only adding an extra 7%. And then
Okay.
the only thing that's question-wise was, when that was presented out there, this video and that picture that's out there, was it done before people voted for the bond?
Yes.
Okay, I just was curious.
I would point out as well that that picture that's out there was portrayed to be a first look and not what any of those would look like. Let me just clarify so that all the information is out there, because we were very, very clear that these were not final drawings, whatever, that these were, first looks. And let me also say that even after that video was made, we then put out our FAQ sheet that talked about 2-story or 3-story because we really didn't know. And so it's not like anyone was trying to be deceptive or anything like that. We were doing everything we could to clarify, what was said there. I'm going to take one more question. You have been very, very patient, and not that everybody else hasn't. But let's do one more question. We'll remain around after the meeting if you want to come up and ask additional questions. And please do fill out those cards, and we'll do the best that we can to answer.
I just live on the 3800 block and 3 houses in the corner, but I've set my 6 kids and I love the school. It's a neighborhood. It's not on a busy thoroughfare, it's a neighborhood. You sold me your video. I trusted that this was going to be a 2-story school. And that's why I voted. If I had known for 1 second this would have been a 3-story school, I would not have voted for the bond. I would have rather.
Thank you. Folks, I am going to have to cut it off. It's 7:22. Thank you for coming. I appreciate your patience, and obviously I appreciate your professionalism and the interaction tonight.